Hi everyone, my name is Apurajkara Kapati. Welcome to my YouTube channel Amazing Abhai. One other than Kirsten, the legendary demon craftsman, and she was once again searching for her daughter, Cecilia. Kirsten practically kicked open every door in the palace, while shouting Cecilia's name. Judging from the maid's reactions, this had become an almost daily occurrence ever since young Master Theo had risen to fame within the clan. Eventually, Kirsten barged straight into an important meeting and finally found Cecilia. For what felt like the 100th time, Cecilia reminded her mother to maintain proper decorum inside the palace, but Kirsten couldn't care less about formalities. Why would she? She was about to become disgustingly rich. Although she was already wealthy by normal standards, Theo's rise had caused orders to flood into her workshop non-stop. Her business had finally exploded in popularity across the entire clan, and considering she was practically the living embodiment of capitalism, Kirsten couldn't have been happier. Cecilia was naturally happy for her mother, but her own thoughts were elsewhere. She had always believed that Theo would achieve great things, and seeing him succeed made her proud. However, watching her son constantly place himself in dangerous situations filled her with anxiety. As a mother, she couldn't stop worrying. What if he got seriously injured? What if the pressure and attention became too much for him? Standing on the sidelines while Theo risked his life made Cecilia feel helpless. Since she couldn't directly protect him, she decided to focus on the one thing she could do, making sure her son always looked absolutely flawless. While Kirsten excitedly rambled about expanding her business into accessories alongside weapons, claiming that this move alone could increase her profits tenfold, Cecilia suddenly came up with an idea. Hoping to help Theo in a more meaningful way, she asked her mother to create a special prosthetic arm. At the same time, high atop the snowy mountain, Theo Ragnar burst into laughter after hearing Theo boldly proclaim himself as the future clan head. Speaking to a small blackbird nearby, Theo calmly stated that he wasn't the type of father who would crush his child's ambitions. In fact, youthful ambition was something that needed to be tested. After all, he himself had once possessed the same burning desire as Theo. The endless graveyard of ownerless swords covering the mountaintop stood as proof of that relentless ambition. More than anything, Theo Ragnar desired the prosperity of the Ragnar clan, and to achieve that goal, he was willing to eliminate absolutely anyone who stood in the way. Looking across the endless sea of swords, he casually remarked that adding one more grave to the collection wouldn't make much difference. Strangely, the little black bird seemed genuinely worried about this year's candidates. Kyle simply responded that when the greater good of the clan was at stake, his blade recognized no blood ties, and then came the shocking revelation. Theo Ragnar already knew that Theo was a regressor. At long last, father and son finally met at the mountain's peak. The moment Theo Ragnar saw Theo's battered and exhausted state, the playful smirk on his face vanished. The cheerful and carefree father Theo knew was nowhere to be seen. Standing amidst the countless swords of his fallen enemies, Kyle looked less like a man and more like death itself. Climbing the mountain had taken Theo nearly 4 hours, even though it normally would have taken him only 1. The overwhelming pressure covering the entire mountain had slowed him down tremendously. Looking at his son, Kyle calmly asked if Theo knew what the graveyard of blades truly represented. Every Ragnar child had heard the legends surrounding this place and the story of their father. This graveyard embodied the very meaning of being the head of the Ragnar clan. It was a position burdened by endless threats, endless enemies, and absolute loneliness. The clan operated under the law of the strong, meaning the family head had to stand above all others. Kyle then asked Theo a simple but terrifying question. Did he truly possess what it took to claim the throne? Without even hesitating, Theo confidently answered yes. However, Kyle immediately warned him not to throw around such absolute answers so lightly. During his own rise to power, Kyle had personally sent countless people to their deaths. Not everyone could shoulder that much hatred and resentment. Standing in this very place always reminded him of the bloody path he had walked. Even now, he could still hear the curses and vows of revenge from those he had slain. Despite hearing all of this, Theo's resolve never wavered. He already knew exactly what kind of person he wanted to become. Everything stemmed from his previous life and his thirst for vengeance. If he could claim the throne, he could finally end the endless bloodshed consuming the clan. That goal mattered more than anything else. Of course, there was no way he could honestly reveal that to his father. So, like a true Ragnar, Theo chose to answer not with words, but with his sword. Kyle immediately grinned. His son clearly knew how things worked in this family. Since Theo had chosen to answer with his blade, Kyle declared that he would no longer treat him as his son, but as a challenger. On top of that, Kyle was curious to see what Theo had learned from a certain special individual. The moment he said that, Theo became certain that his father was referring to Lodbrok. This all but confirmed Theo's suspicion that Kyle Ragnar had indeed taken the ancient dragon's heart. Instinctively, Theo prepared himself for battle, but it was already too late. In less than a fraction of a second, Kyle casually sliced him cleanly in half. Theo didn't even realize what had happened at first. Suddenly, he couldn't feel the lower half of his body anymore. Death had come for him once again, split apart like nothing more than a piece of meat. Theo slowly felt his life slipping away. Kyle hadn't been holding back in the slightest. This terrifying ability was known as the Heart Sword. After cutting down his own son, Kyle turned toward the worried blackbird nearby and calmly assured it that there was no need to panic. Only those with truly unbreakable resolve could escape the effects of the Heart Sword. While it was undeniably a cruel trial to impose on someone still undergoing their awakening ceremony, Theo should be able to return if his determination was genuine. However, if Theo possessed only half-hearted resolve, then it would be better for him to die here and become nothing more than an empty shell. Kyle had no use for a regressor who might one day bring disaster upon the clan. Theo's soul soon found itself drifting inside an endless void located somewhere between life and death. He could once again feel the familiar sensation of death slowly grinding away what remained of his existence. Quickly accepting reality, Theo understood why he had died. After all, surviving an attack from a demigod was never realistic to begin with. As he floated in that endless darkness, Theo reflected on everything he had accomplished in this life. He tried convincing himself that he had already done enough. He had successfully taken Camilla Palace away from the Troivans. He had killed Rendon and Action, the very bastards responsible for ending his previous life. Anything beyond those accomplishments would have simply been a bonus. Compared to his first life, this second life had been much shorter, but it had also been far happier. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad to finally let go and rest peacefully. As Theo gradually accepted death, his will began fading away. One by one, the final fragments of his soul started evaporating like morning dew. Just as the last traces of his existence were about to disappear forever, the griffin residing inside his sword suddenly intervened. The giant bird forcibly entered the endless void and immediately started scolding Theo. If Theo was seriously planning to give up this easily, then the griffin was going to be extremely pissed. Hearing the bird's sarcastic voice trash-talking him reignited something deep inside Theo. That single spark, combined with the griffin's harsh words, was enough to snap him out of his loser mentality. No way was this place going to become Theo Ragnar's final resting ground. Drawing upon his indomitable will, Theo's soul rapidly reconstructed itself. He had already surrendered once in his previous life, and he absolutely refused to let his story end here. After restoring his soul, Theo pushed himself even further and manifested a sword capable of cutting through the endless void itself. He remembered the vow he had made long ago. His body might break, his mind might shatter, even his soul could be torn apart, but Theo Ragnar would never yield. Standing within the empty abyss, Theo swung his blade with every ounce of his desperate determination to live. The slash he unleashed became the purest and strongest strike he had ever produced. It was sharp enough to sever even the very possibility of fading out of existence. In an instant, the illusion of death shattered completely, and brilliant light flooded into the darkness. Theo suddenly opened his eyes and found himself back atop the mountain. He had successfully broken free from the Heart Sword's death illusion. Thanks to the griffin residing within his sword, he had avoided becoming an empty vessel, devoid of a soul. Standing before him, Kyle Ragnar observed his son with an unreadable gaze. The ruthless demigod finally smirked and acknowledged Theo's success. It had truly been a life-or-death challenge, and against all odds, Theo had passed. A full week flew by after the final round of the blooming ceremony, and before anyone knew it, the day of the nomination ceremony had arrived at the clan headquarters. Among those in attendance were the Lanka siblings, both waiting anxiously for their names to be called. Well, Erica was relaxed. Hulkus, on the other hand, looked incredibly uncomfortable. The giant hated crowded places, and Erica wasted no time teasing him for acting like a nervous baby. To be fair, though, his anxiety was understandable. Every major figure in the Ragnar clan was present, the commanders of every unit, all 9 dragons, the former clan head, and even the current patriarch himself. Still, Erica warned her brother that if he kept looking so terrified, nobody would want to recruit him into their faction. She also couldn't resist bringing up the fact that, despite collecting so many bells, Hulkus had still failed to obtain an elemental breathing method. Hulkus was still incredibly salty about that. Before we move ahead, please take a second to like on this video. A like tells me that you enjoyed this topic. Your support helps Amazing Apai grow naturally. On top of that, Erica refused to tell him what happened when she met the clan head at the mountain peak, which only made him more frustrated. Hulkus argued that if Theo had been in her position, the guy would have definitely shared the secret already. As a member of the Lanka family, whose entire existence revolved around serving as Ragnar's sword, Hulkus had already made up his mind. He had decided to devote himself to the coolest, strongest, and most ambitious guy in their generation, Theo Ragnar. In Hulkus' eyes, Theo had it all: strength, character, and overwhelming ambition. The glazing was absolutely unreal. Even though the two had barely spoken, Hulkus had already decided to bet his life on the young master. Since the patriarch apparently wasn't taking Theo directly into the clan head's manor, there was still a chance for ordinary recruits like Hulkus and the countless Theo fans to join whatever faction their idol eventually chose. The loud chatter filling the arena was suddenly interrupted by the booming sound of ceremonial drums, signaling the official start of the nomination ceremony. Without wasting any time, the announcer called forward the overall valedictorian of the current generation, Theo Ragnar. The crowd instantly erupted into cheers. Both civilians and swordsmen alike celebrated the young man who had once been ridiculed and mocked by everyone around him. Theo calmly accepted their applause with a smile as he stepped before the clan's higher-ups. Among the crowd, Evelyn silently cheered for the young master she had personally helped raise. Deep down, she hoped Theo would join the White Armor Dragon Cavalry, though she knew that was little more than a selfish wish. Theo had proven himself beyond doubt. As valedictorian, he had dominated every category and outperformed every single one of his peers. Just as he was about to choose his faction, an unexpected figure suddenly stood up from among the 9 dragons. It was Ed Troyvan, the Sky Dragon himself and director of the Central Intelligence Bureau. The atmosphere instantly became tense. Many spectators worried that the madman might try something reckless to avenge his nephew. Action. Naturally, that would have been suicide considering the number of monsters gathered in the arena. Even the announcer firmly ordered Ed to sit back down. Theo himself assumed the man was still grieving Action's death, but he wasn't particularly worried while standing under the protection of so many powerful figures. To everyone's complete shock, however, Ed suddenly displayed a bright, fake smile and formally invited Theo to join the Central Intelligence Bureau as its new deputy director. The entire audience was dumbfounded. Theo had literally killed the man's nephew, and somehow he was being rewarded with one of the most prestigious positions in the clan. Being named valedictorian carried tremendous significance within the Ragnar clan. Once sitting at the very bottom of the succession hierarchy, Theo had finally spread his wings and soared upward. Stories about his accomplishments had already spread throughout the clan like wildfire. Everyone was talking about how he had killed Action and fought evenly against senior proctors. His rise from complete failure to top genius resonated deeply with countless apprentice swordsmen. The public's perception of Theo had completely flipped. The so-called idiot of Ragnar no longer existed. In his place stood a monstrous genius with limitless potential. As Theo stood at the center of the stage, the system suddenly chimed. He had successfully completed the 3rd scenario quest and received an ether core as his reward. Theo was pleasantly surprised. It had been so long since he last heard from the system that he had almost forgotten about the quest entirely. Considering how long it had taken to complete, this ether core had to be something incredible. Unfortunately, before he could even examine his reward, he still had to deal with Ed Troyvan's suspicious offer. Activating observation on Ed, Theo confirmed exactly what he had already suspected. The Sky Dragon intended to take him under his wing and use him as a pawn to uncover the secrets surrounding the primordial dragon relics. Ed likely suspected that Theo already possessed one of those relics. Of course, there was absolutely no chance Theo would ever bow his head to a Troivon. Crushing that cursed family was literally one of his life's greatest goals. The demon dragon, Theo Ragnar, immediately called Ed out, accusing him of disguising his desire for revenge behind official business. Ed simply laughed off the accusation. While he'd admitted to harboring some resentment as Action's uncle, he insisted that as director of the Central Intelligence Bureau, he only wanted to recruit the most talented candidate available. Julius merely clicked his tongue. Ed Troivon was still the same slippery bastard as always, constantly scheming behind the scenes. Before the argument could escalate further, the announcer quickly intervened and ordered the 9 dragons to stop interrupting the ceremony. When Theo was asked whether he already had a faction in mind, he calmly answered that he had not made a final decision yet. Instead, he wanted to hear what every faction had to offer first. In other words, he had effectively started a bidding war for his services. The first person to jump in was the Sword Dragon herself, Theo Ragnar Planes, the director of the Plumblossom Palace. She offered to take Theo as her direct disciple and make him a junior lord. Since Lady Plumblossom had no children of her own, becoming her disciple was essentially the same as becoming her adopted son and future successor to the Sword Dragon title. It was an absurdly attractive offer, unsurprisingly. Other major figures soon joined the bidding war, but before anyone could continue, a thunderous figure suddenly crashed down from the sky, wrapped completely in bandages and wearing a mask. Robert Ragnar, the Black Dragon and leader of Black Snow, had arrived. The audience was stunned. Most people had never even seen the man appear publicly before. Apparently, he had been observing Theo since the very beginning of the awakening ceremony. Robert admitted that Kyle had been right about the boy being interesting. If Theo joined Black Snow, Robert would immediately grant him the title of Null Snow. Within Black Snow, agents typically operated in complete secrecy. However, Null Snows were different. They were the highest-ranking officers in the organization, and were allowed to maintain public identities and gain fame. In Theo's previous life, there had only been 8 Null Snows, and reaching that rank had been nearly impossible. Yet now, the title was being handed to him on a silver platter. Not wanting to miss out, the Zenith Dragon Theo Ragnar also made an offer, inviting Theo to join Zenith Academy after being thoroughly impressed during the 3rd trial. 4 of the 9 dragons had now personally extended offers to Theo, proving just how valuable he had become. Naturally, Julius Ragnar, commander of the White Armor Dragon Cavalry, also stepped forward. Unlike everyone else, however, Julius refused to offer Theo any special privileges. His own subordinates nearly exploded in frustration, yelling that this wasn't the time to cling to principles. Evelyn, however, wasn't surprised in the slightest. The White Armor Dragon Cavalry lived by a simple creed: honor had to be earned. Julius wanted to remain fair to every recruit, but he proudly promised Theo full support and the honor of becoming a true dragon. Theo respected that honesty just as he was about to finally make his decision. A seductive voice suddenly echoed directly inside his mind. It belonged to none other than the former clan head, Hilda Ragnar. Completely out of nowhere, she asked Theo whether he was a regressor. Judging by her tone, she already knew the answer. Keeping his composure, Theo pretended not to understand what she meant. Hilda merely praised his acting skills, and wondered aloud what kind of life he had lived during his previous cycle. The mention of cycles immediately shook Theo. Did that mean regression wasn't limited to a single do-over? While Theo internally suffered an existential crisis, the rest of the arena was still waiting for his decision. Asking for more time, Theo tried to organize his thoughts. Hilda found his reaction amusing, and assured him there was no need to hide. After all, she herself was also a regressor. The difference was that she had already exhausted all the cycles available to her. In other words, his ridiculously attractive fine-ass grandma had lived through multiple regressions. That revelation completely shattered Theo's understanding of reality. Hoping for answers, Theo immediately asked her what exactly these cycles meant. Hilda seemed genuinely surprised that he didn't know something so basic. Apparently, Kyle had never told him anything, which honestly wasn't surprising, considering the patriarch's deep hatred toward regressors. In fact, Hilda thought it was strange that Kyle had allowed Theo to live at all, even if he was his own son. That probably explained why Theo had been forced to undergo such a brutal life or death test to top the mountain. Pleased by Theo's hunger for knowledge, Hilda promised to explain everything later. If Theo truly wanted to uncover the secrets of the Ragnar clan and the world itself, then he needed to seek her out after the ceremony. Before we move ahead, please take a second to share on this video. Sharing helps this video reach friends who may also enjoy anime, gaming, travel, cricket, chess, career basics, or personal stories. Your support helps Amazing Abhai grow naturally. Suddenly, Theo realized that during their mountain encounter, his father had given him nothing but the merciless heart sword treatment. Knowing now that Kyle hated regressors only made him even wearier of the patriarch. Perhaps Kyle had even taken Lodbrok's heart because the ancient dragon welcomed regressors. Although defeating a dragon of that caliber sounded impossible, Kyle Ragnar was hailed as a demigod for a reason. The man was simply built different. Theo knew that if he wanted answers about regression, he would eventually need a very long conversation with Grandma Hilda. But first, he had to make his decision. Puffing out his chest confidently, Theo finally announced that he had chosen his faction, but were not revealing what he picked. As expected, Remington Narsuo, the runner-up of the entire batch, chose to join the Zenith Academy and officially became the disciple of the Zenith Dragon. Honestly, it was a match made in heaven. Both master and disciple specialized in water current breathing, making the pairing almost perfect. In Theo's previous life, Remington had returned to the Narsuo clan and trained independently. Eventually, he would lead a bloody rebellion against the Ragnar clan itself. And trust me, having the Silver Lion as your enemy never ends well. But this time, things had changed. Thanks to Theo's influence, Remington chose to remain within Ragnar instead of leaving. For now, it was only a temporary farewell between rivals. Both young men would continue growing stronger in their respective factions, carrying a promise to meet again one day as even greater warriors. In such a short amount of time, they had become genuine brothers in arms. Meanwhile, Ragnar naturally returned to Daffodil Palace, where her mother, the Ice Dragon, ruled supreme. Honestly, there was no better place for someone like Rai. As for Sybil and the rest of the boys from Training Ground 4, they desperately wanted to follow Theo into his chosen faction. Unfortunately, their grades simply weren't high enough to gain admission there. Although it saddened Theo to part ways with his comrades, he understood that this separation was necessary. He looked forward to seeing each of them spread their wings and walk their own paths. After the ceremony ended and everyone began dispersing, the Lenka Sibyls approached Theo. Hulkus awkwardly tried to act like ending up in the same faction as Theo had been nothing more than a coincidence. Theo, of course, politely greeted both Sybil and sincerely thanked them for helping him during the second stage of the blooming ceremony. Erica immediately informed Theo that she intended to collect that debt someday in the future. After all, she had a thing for strong men, and apparently so did her gigantic brother. Before their conversation could continue, one of the supervisors ordered the recruits to focus because their commander was about to arrive. Naturally, Theo had chosen the most honorable military unit in the entire Ragnar clan, the White Armor Dragon Cavalry. It was the perfect place for him to build influence and begin his campaign toward becoming the next clan head. The legendary demon dragon, Julius Ragnar, personally led the cavalry. Theo would have to postpone his conversation with Grandma Hilda for now. At the moment, it was time for the rookies to declare their ambitions. Hulkus loudly announced that he intended to become an amazing dragoon. Some recruits declared that they wanted fame and glory. Erica boldly proclaimed that she would become the strongest of her generation, though accomplishing that would be incredibly difficult. One recruit simply wished to earn Commander Julius' acknowledgement, earning himself some rather strange looks from everyone around him. Finally, it was Theo's turn. Knowing that the Great War would inevitably arrive in 5 years, Theo fearlessly declared that he would become the commander of the White Armor Dragon Cavalry within that same time frame. Saying something like that directly in front of the current commander required an absurd amount of courage. Surprisingly, Julius wasn't offended in the slightest. In fact, He loved hearing grand ambitions from young recruits. He reminded them that regardless of why they had joined the cavalry, they should never forget one thing. Every drop of blood and sweat they shed while serving this unit would eventually become legend. The struggles of today would become tomorrow's pride. The cavalry's shield would never break, and their swords would never yield. From this moment onward, they were bound by their creed and must always watch each other's backs. At the end of the long road, forged through blood and hardship, awaited nothing but glory. With those inspiring words, the demon dragon officially welcomed the new recruits. As if to demonstrate the cavalry's might, Julius' partner suddenly descended from the skies. His massive flying dragon, Gala, made an incredibly intimidating entrance. This gigantic beast symbolized everything the dragon stood for. Moments later, countless other wyverns and dragons darkened the skies as they flew overhead in formation. Riding atop them were the senior members of the cavalry. Each rookie would now be assigned a personal handler for the day. Because the admission test was about to begin, to officially become dragons, the recruits first had to obtain partners of their own. The sight of countless dragons soaring through the sky was breathtaking. Every child born into the Ragnar clan had once dreamed of having a flying dragon companion. Much to Theo's surprise, his assigned handler turned out to be none other than Evelyn. Seeing her back in a cavalry rather than training ground for shocked him. Curious, Theo asked whether she had finally returned to active duty. With a bright smile, Evelyn revealed that she had indeed resumed her duties, thanks to her brand new prosthetic arm crafted by the demon craftsman Kirsten herself. A few days earlier, Cecilia and Kirsten had personally visited Evelyn to thank her for supporting Theo all this time. At the time, Evelyn had been in the middle of training the boys from Training Ground 4. True to her nature, Evelyn immediately downplayed her own contributions, insisting that Theo's achievements were entirely the result of his natural talent. Cecilia, however, disagreed. She believed that Evelyn's encouragement and unwavering support had played an enormous role in shaping Theo into the person he had become. Knowing that her son had someone as dependable as Evelyn by his side, Cecilia wanted to repay her somehow. Even then, Evelyn continued speaking poorly of herself. Kirsten didn't like hearing that. The elf explained that people who shine brightly enough to guide others through darkness often failed to realize just how radiant they truly are. Kirsten could see the hidden brilliance inside the one-armed swordswoman and wanted to help her shine even brighter. Now, thanks to her new arm, Evelyn had reclaimed the life she loved most as one of the White Armor Dragon Cavalry's elite dragons. Apparently, Cecilia had even told Evelyn that Theo himself was responsible for arranging the favor, allowing her to ride her beloved dragon once again. Theo had absolutely no idea any of this had happened behind the scenes. Even without him knowing, his mother continued proving that she was simply the best mom in existence. Deeply moved by everything that had been done for her, Evelyn swore her loyalty to Theo and pledged to become his personal sword. Theo gladly accepted her oath, as the two flew toward the dangerous nesting grounds of the White Armored Dragon Cavalry. The White Dragon Nest was an incredibly hostile place and hardly suitable for human habitation. Despite its name, it primarily housed numerous species of flying wyverns rather than true dragons. It was also where the cavalry conducted its admission test. Failing to bond with a suitable partner meant immediate disqualification from the cavalry, though outright failures were rare. Theo wasn't particularly worried about himself, but he did feel slightly concerned about the brutish Lenka siblings. Evelyn explained that choosing a partner wasn't based on strength or logic. It was more about instinct, chemistry, and pure vibes. When you found the right partner, you simply knew. Their first stop was the territory of Opterks, massive brown-scaled wyverns known for their tyrannical and predatory nature. Next, they visited the lair of the poisonous Avery species. These serpentine wyverns could spray deadly violet poison mist and strike enemies using lethal stingers. They then observed the blade dragons, Sygia, which were surprisingly docile herbivores that preferred living underground and relied on ambush tactics for defense. Flying high above them were the velociraptors, speed dragons that were small, intelligent, hunted in packs, and breathed fire from their mouths. These four categories made up the majority of the cavalry's wyvern population. Unfortunately, Theo didn't feel any connection with any of them. Instead, memories from his previous life resurfaced. 6 years after the Great War began, a horrifying, mutated wyvern had attacked the White Dragon Nest. The beast massacred hundreds of mounts belonging to the cavalry, burned 8 villages to ashes, and killed dozens of warriors. The Ragnar clan had ultimately classified it as a Class 2 calamity and named it the Evil Shadow Dragon. In the end, it had taken both the Demon Dragon and the Sword Dragon working together to finally bring the monster down. The creature earned its name because of its terrifying ability to hide within shadows. If possible, Theo would absolutely love to bond with that anomaly. Recalling his memories carefully, Theo remembered one extremely obvious characteristic that distinguished the beast. After searching for quite some time, he finally spotted exactly what he had been looking for. Before we move ahead, please take a second to like on this video. A like tells me that you enjoyed this topic. Your support helps Amazing Up grow naturally. Meanwhile, while the recruit searched for partners, Commander Julius relaxed atop the dangerous cliffs alongside Gulla. His peaceful moment was interrupted by the arrival of the Sword Dragon, Sir Ragnar Plunas. Surprisingly, Julius didn't seem bothered. After all, he had just recruited the greatest talent in the clan's history. Osa, however, had come precisely because of Theo. She knew Julius intended to mold the boy into one of the cavalry's future pillars. Julius neither confirmed nor denied her suspicions. He knew that careless words often led to downfall. Nevertheless, Osa could easily tell that Julius was planning something much bigger than he was willing to admit. Fortunately, she hadn't come to argue. Instead, she proposed something unprecedented for Theo's sake joint mentorship. Despite Theo already belonging to the cavalry, Osa suggested that both factions work together to guide the young prodigy. Such a proposal was practically unheard of, since Ragnar factions almost never cooperated or bent tradition for a single recruit. Back to the action. Theo and Evelyn flew toward a remote corner of the nest that Theo had spotted from afar. As they got closer, they found 4 young wyverns ganging up on a single bluish-white wyvern. Evelyn immediately recognized the poor creature. Apparently, the cavalry had been aware of this particular wyvern situation for a long time. No matter what methods they tried, nothing worked. The other wyverns constantly ostracized him because he wasn't considered pure-blooded. The poor guy was the offspring of a female wyvern and a male vapor. Yes, somehow a wyvern and a vapor had actually reproduced. The problem was that vapors were Class 1 demonic fiends that lived deep within the demon sea. These monsters were basically living calamities. If even one of them ever managed to cross the Great Wall, entire regions could be devastated. Not only were they absurdly dangerous, but they were also ugly ghost-type monsters that specialized in dwelling within shadows. Hearing this, Theo immediately connected the dots. So that was how the future evil shadow dragon had gained its terrifying shadow abilities. It had inherited them from its vapor bloodline. Naturally, the birth of this hybrid caused a massive uproar within the cavalry. Many opposed allowing it to remain in the nest, but in the end, the commanders decided to keep the creature under observation. Unfortunately, that decision only led to years of bullying and rejection from the other wyverns. Isolating the creature wasn't a solution either, leaving the cavalry completely unsure of what to do. Hearing about the hybrid's miserable life deeply resonated with Theo. Being ostracized simply for being different was something he understood all too well. The cavalry had named the lonely wyvern Umbra, meaning shadow in the ancient tongue. Theo smiled the moment he heard that name. Somehow, he just knew he had finally found his partner. Without giving Evelyn any warning whatsoever, Theo suddenly stood up on the saddle and announced his decision. Before Evelyn could even land properly, the absolute madman jumped off the flying wyvern. No preparation, no parachute, no safety measures. He was simply too excited to meet Umbra. Watching the young master casually skydive under her supervision nearly gave Evelyn a heart attack, but Theo didn't care. In his previous life, Umbra had become a monster, feared across the continent. This time, Theo wanted to give him a different future. Theo had been given a second chance at life, so why shouldn't Umbra receive one as well? Channeling mana throughout his body, Theo descended like a bolt of lightning from the heavens. On his way down, he drew several swords and launched them at varying speeds. Activating hatchling synchronization, he seized control of the blades through psychokinesis. Using them as temporary footholds, Theo literally ran through the air while descending, completely ignoring the laws of gravity. Learning psychokinesis was already impressive, but using it in such an absurdly creative way left even Evelyn speechless. Theo's growth rate was genuinely monstrous. Down below, the wyverns bullying Umbra hissed aggressively at the newcomer. Umbra himself refused to back down, and growled right back. Watching the entire scene unfold reminded Theo of his own past as Ragnar's so-called idiot. Back then, all he could do was silently endure everyone's insults and mockery, but those days were gone. He was no longer that powerless boy. Sparks erupted around Theo as Thunder Dragon breathing activated. Once he entered range, he sent his blades flying toward the bullies charged with overwhelming amounts of lightning and empowered by his dragon mark. The attack terrified the wyverns. Theo could have easily killed them, but he intentionally held back and merely scared them away. Tails tucked, the bullies immediately fled, landing gracefully. Theo openly scolded the cowardly wyverns for relying on numbers. Then, when he turned toward Umbra, his expression softened. Umbra, however, remained wary. Growing defensively, the hybrid prepared to attack at the slightest sign of hostility. Yet, when Theo finally approached, Umbra chose to retreat instead, taking flight and disappearing into the mountains. Evelyn eventually caught up and warned Theo that approaching Umbra wouldn't be easy. The hybrid had every reason to distrust others. She advised Theo to take things slowly, but Theo disagreed. Right now, what Umbra needed most wasn't caution. It was companionship. After all, why would a creature continue living near the nest, despite being constantly rejected? The answer was simple. Umbra was lonely. Emotional wounds often hurt far more than physical injuries. Considering the hybrid's condition, Theo doubted he could have flown very far. As expected, after searching the nearby peaks, they found Umbra resting atop a rocky outcrop. Even though he was exhausted and injured, Umbra immediately forced himself to stand when the humans arrived. Countless dragons had attempted to tame him before, but every single one had failed. Given his experiences, Umbra's caution toward humans was understandable. Theo asked Evelyn to fetch some food while he tried connecting with Umbra personally. Slowly walking forward, Theo was immediately met with wyvern fear. Without hesitation, he countered with lesser drake's fear. For a moment, man and beast clashed through pure aura alone. Eventually, Theo's overwhelming presence steadily suppressed Umbra's. The hybrid braced himself for violence, but instead, Theo gently poured a healing potion over his wounds. As the medicine worked its magic, Umbra felt his injuries rapidly heal, and some of his strength returned. Once the worst wounds had been treated, Theo gently petted the lonely hybrid. Umbra was completely confused. His entire life had consisted of nothing but pain, rejection, and loneliness. Yet now, a human was showing him genuine kindness. Thanks to his dragon heart, Theo could actually feel Umbra's emotions. He sensed the burning rage Umbra held toward the herd that had rejected him. At the same time, he could feel the heartbreaking sadness born from Umbra's desire to still belong among them. But stronger than anything else was the crushing loneliness buried deep inside the hybrid's heart. Theo also sensed Umbra's conflicted feelings toward him. The wyvern remained wary of the strange human who had suddenly appeared and offered warmth. Yet deep down, Umbra desperately hoped that warmth wouldn't disappear. He didn't want Theo to leave. In response, Theo solemnly promised that he would never abandon him. Then, to solidify their bond, Theo presented Umbra with the precious gem he had received from his previous mission. The shiny treasure instantly captivated the hybrid. Although Umbra tried acting like a sundae and resisting temptation, there was nothing he could do. When Theo personally placed the gem around his neck, Theo sweetened the deal even further by promising that if Umbra stayed with him, there would be plenty more treasures. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to Amazing Apai. Subscribing makes sure you do not miss the next video, and it gives me motivation to keep improving the quality of every upload. Thank you for being here, and I will see you in the next one.